All right, let's decode the R wave. By the end of this explainer, you're going to go from just staring at complex, squiggly lines on a grid to confidently spotting deadly poisonings and rare genetic conditions. We're talking about transforming the way you look at an ECG so you can instantly pinpoint structural, electrical, and toxicological emergencies.
Here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we'll meet the R wave to set our baseline. Then we'll investigate a dominant R in V1 and spot those specific causes. And finally, we'll do the exact same thing for a dominant R in AVR.
Section 1. Meet the R wave. Let's get our baseline sorted.
Okay, so the R wave. It is simply the first upward deflection right after the P wave. That's it. It's that towering peak sitting smack in the middle of the QRS complex. Physiologically, this upward spike is early ventricular depolarisation, literally the exact moment the main pumping chambers of the heart get the electrical signal to squeeze. Understanding this normal baseline is absolutely crucial, because when this wave gets too big in the wrong places, well, it's basically waving a massive red flag at you.
Section 2. Dominant R in V1. Let's see what happens when V1 gets a bit too big.
Now, there are a bunch of causes for this, but we can totally chunk them into a few logical buckets. First up, you've got your structural issues, like right ventricular hypertrophy and hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, where a thickened septum is creating these massive electrical forces. Then we've got electrical conduction issues, primarily a right bundle branch block, or RBB, and Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome. We also have to be on high alert for acute, life-threatening events, like a pulmonary embolus or a posterior myocardial infarction. And finally, keep in mind it can actually be perfectly normal in youth.
So what do these actually look like in the real world? Because, let's be honest, memorizing a list is one thing. But as clinical learners, you have to recognize the visual patterns. If you're on a busy shift, you do not have time to go dig up a textbook. You need to know exactly what a PE or a posterior MI looks like the second it's staring you in the face.
Section 3. Spotting the causes. Time to read some real ECGs.
First off, context is literally everything. A dominant R wave in V1? It can actually be perfectly normal if you're looking at a child or a young adult, kind of like a persistence of an infantile pattern. What we have here is an ECG from a totally healthy 2-year-old. You see, the right ventricle is relatively larger in infants compared to the left, which naturally throws up this taller R wave in V1. So, rule number 1, always check the patient's age before you go sounding the alarm.
Now check out this clear right ventricular hypertrophy. See how massive that initial upward spike is? When the right ventricle has to pump against really high resistance, which could be driven by a left to right shunt or acutely by a pulmonary embolus, the muscle hypertrophies. It gets thick. And more muscle equals way more electrical activity directed right at lead V1, which gives you this strikingly dominant R wave.
Okay, moving to an electrical cause. This is a brilliant example of the unmistakable M pattern in V1. That tells you right away you're looking at a right bundle branch block. Here's why it happens. The electrical pathway to the right ventricle is blocked, right? So the left ventricle depolarizes first, and the right ventricle fires late. This delayed electrical signal traveling toward V1 creates a second, often even taller R wave, giving us that classic M shape. See the M in V1? You've got an RBBB.
This next one is absolutely crucial. You must consider acute ischemic events, specifically a posterior MI. The posterior wall of the heart sits electrically opposite to lead V1, so when the posterior wall dies during a heart attack, its electrical forces just vanish. This leaves the electrical forces of the anterior wall totally unopposed, which looks exactly like a tall R wave in V1. It's essentially a mirror image of a Q wave. If you spot this, you have to confirm your suspicion. How? By placing posterior leads, that's V7, V8, and V9, on the patient's back and hunting for that ST elevation.
Wrapping up V1, look closely at this slurred upstroke on the QRS complex. That is a delta wave, caused by Wolff-Parkinson-White type A. WPW is basically a rogue accessory pathway that completely bypasses the AV node, causing early ventricular depolarization, or pre-excitation. That creates this incredibly distinct morphological pattern, often showing up as a big, prominent R wave in V1.
Section 4. Dominant R in AVR. Let's switch gears to the right shoulder lead.
The list of suspects here might be shorter than V1, but man, it packs a punch. We're talking life-threatening sodium channel blocker poisonings like tricyclic antidepressants, or TCAs. We've also got dextrocardia and ventricular tachycardia, where those abnormal wide complexes will often just shoot straight up in AVR.
And finally, we have simple human error, putting the leads on wrong.
Section 5, AVR, Spotting the Causes. Let's break down these vital clues.
If you even slightly suspect poisoning with a sodium channel blocker like a TCA, you need to stare straight at AVR. The criteria you absolutely must memorize are an R wave height greater than 3 millimeters or an R to S wave ratio greater than 0.7. Why? Because sodium channel blockers slow down the final phase of ventricular depolarisation. This actually shifts the terminal electrical axis to the right and superiorly, pointing directly at lead AVR.
Notice how that characteristic dominant terminal R wave practically jumps off the page to scream toxicity at you. You see that final upward deflection right at the end of the QRS complex. It's wide, it's incredibly tall, and it clearly blows past our 3 millimeter threshold. In the context of an overdose, seeing this tells you the patient is at extremely high risk for seizures and highly dangerous arrhythmias.
Next up is dextrocardia. This is a rare congenital condition where the heart literally points to the right side of the chest instead of the left. If you're looking at true dextrocardia, you're going to see a positive QRS with upright P and T waves in AVR paired with a negative QRS in lead I. You'll also see some marked right axis deviation. But here's the real kicker. Pay close attention. You will see absent or very poor R wave progression in the chest leads. Now, poor R wave progression basically means dominant S waves remain throughout the chest leads, totally missing that normal gradual increase in R wave size you usually get from V1 to V6. Makes sense, right? Because the heart is on the other side of the chest, standard chest leads are just looking at the back of the heart. Just as a quick aside, while dextrocardia does cause this, keep in mind that poor R wave progression can also be caused by things like an old anterior MI, left ventricular hypertrophy, or even severe COPD.
Now, this side-by-side comparison is absolutely vital. Why? Because the single most common cause of a dominant R in AVR is actually just incorrect limb lead placement. If a tech accidentally swaps the left arm and right arm electrodes, it produces a pattern shockingly similar to dextrocardia in those limb leads. Both scenarios are going to give you that weird dominant R wave in AVR that usually has no business being there.
So, how do you avoid misdiagnosing a simple technical error as a rare genetic anomaly? The trick to telling them apart lies entirely in the chest leads. It goes right back to that concept of R-wave progression we just talked about. A simple arm lead reversal, well, the chest leads haven't moved at all, so they will maintain perfectly normal R-wave progression. But true dextrocardia, you're going to see that poor or absent R-wave progression featuring dominant S waves the whole way across because the heart is physically located on the right side of the body.
Mastering this single wave is a total game changer. By systematically understanding the dominant R wave in V1 and AVR, you transform from just looking at random squiggles on a page to confidently diagnosing structural overloads, electrical miswires, and massive toxicological emergencies. We've gone from normal baseline anatomy right through to RVH, RBBB, posterior MI, and sodium channel blocker toxicity, all just by focusing on the behavior of a single wave in two specific leads.
So here's my challenge to you. The very next time you pick up a 12-lead ECG, will you catch those hidden clues before it's too late? I challenge you to make checking leads V1 and AVR the absolute first thing you do on your next clinical shift. Don't let these subtle but totally life-saving clues pass you by. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.